Dr. Treacy, most companies over the last 30 years have developed a discipline around costs. And some, even during the Great Recession, have been able to eke out profit growth through cost and productivity measures. Why haven't more firms developed a growth discipline? And what can executives learn about managing costs that they can apply to managing growth?
Well, if you look at how companies control costs, it really is the full instantiation of a discipline in many organizations. So for example, during this last recession, a lot of companies had to reduce their costs and reduce them fairly quickly. What do? Senior executives get around a table, they examine their income statement looking at all those categories of costs, they set stretch objectives in each one of those cost categories, and then individual executives take personal accountability for going out of that room, putting a team together, and figuring out the myriad ways that they're going to go and attack that cost component. 12 months later, what do you got? You got all those cost cuts delivered to the bottom line of the business. What is that system? Well, it's good information about where the costs lie. It's leadership. It's accountability. It's getting a team of people cross-functionally engaged in the process. It's innovation to develop new ways that they can look at how to operate the business at a lower cost. It's a portfolio of cost-cutting initiatives. It's all of the stuff we need to have in any discipline, whether it be for cost or for growth. So there's a lot to learn by self-examining what have we done well on cost to say how do I transfer some of that to growth. Now why has there been more progress on cost than on growth? Well, quite frankly, because cost is easier, or it's perceived to be easier. Why? Because it's all internal. We don't have the uncertainty and vagaries of the marketplace, of customers who may not like what we want to do. It is in fact more analyzable. It requires less testing, less validation that these are really good ideas. And furthermore, with more experience doing costs, we've built up a bigger set of best practices. Over time, though, I assure you that a growth discipline can become just as second nature as a cost discipline for every company.
You spoke about managing a portfolio of growth initiatives. How is this different from the ways most firms approach growth planning today? And why is this notion of the portfolio approach so important?
Well, most companies that develop a growth plan, what they do is they further detail the plan until they get to a point that it's reduced down to things that can be executed upon. When you use a growth portfolio instead, what you're talking about is a set of independent initiatives, one from another, aimed at various categories of revenue opportunity. And there are three very, very important things happen when you construct your growth plan as a portfolio as opposed to an integrated plan. The first thing that happens is it's more flexible and dynamic, so that if conditions change in the market, I can adjust the weighting I give to the various components of my portfolio, or I can stop certain things in the portfolio, add other things. So it gives you a lot more flexibility to adjust to circumstances as they evolve. And it's not just a market changing. It may also be that of those growth initiatives, a couple of them don't work out the way we thought, or the opposite. One of them turns out to be far more effective than we thought. Okay, how do we now really reinforce that with further resources and drive that? So it gives you an inherent flexibility. Second thing that a portfolio of growth initiatives does when they're independent of each other is it devolves accountability. Now I have a lot of different people who are going to be accountable for an integrated, holistic initiative around growth. And it gets more people on the playing field feeling accountable for the performance of their piece of the growth initiative. So that's the second thing that's done. The third thing that happens when you have a growth portfolio is you can really start now balancing risks, resources, types, where you want to grow. You can in essence find a way to engage a broader part of the organization by distributing responsibility and by having more varied types of growth initiatives so that everybody has an opportunity to essentially be on the playing field and playing a role.
You cited two important arenas for innovation. Innovation in what we offer, our products and services, and innovation in how we market, sell, distribute, support, our go-to-market areas. Can you please give examples of companies that do product and service innovation well and those that do go-to-market innovation well?
On product and service innovation, many of those firms are relatively well known because those are the companies we know and love what it is they do for us. So on the product front, many of the old chestnuts, whether it be 3M, BMW, companies that are known for really great products, Apple Computer, those firms still are setting the standard and have for year after year because they really have a discipline around product innovation and product leadership. On the service front, there's all sorts of examples that come to mind. I mean, I think about Zappos, for example, and how they've revolutionized shoe retailing over the internet by just making the order, shipping, billing, return process so incredibly elegantly hassle-free. Or think about Zipcar and what they've done in the day rental market. That's run by a former colleague of mine, Scott Griffith. And you know, the service is so efficient that you can go to a parking lot and actually have the car unlocked for you from your cell phone. I mean, how slick is that? So that's a service innovation around a service-intensive product like rental cars. So there's lots of examples of firms that are value leaders and that I think are very much consistent with some of the principles of value leadership. If you look at go-to-market innovation, there are examples there as well. So if you think about a classic example now is Netflix versus Blockbuster, where it wasn't just that Netflix was essentially marketing itself through the web as opposed to through brick and mortar, but more importantly, they were accumulating a history on what their clients were wanting in the way of movies, and therefore able to suggest and help clients prioritize and anticipate the next movie that they might want. Tremendous innovation in how they retain clients and get them to buy more and all the rest. Tremendous idea. It'll be interesting to see, though, as Netflix core business, their service has to transform, right? Because we're not going to have DVDs for that much longer. Are they able to take their go-to-market skills, now apply them in a cable, TV, DSL type environment, and continue to succeed? Another example I think about in the industrial space is a company like Alcoa. Under Bill Christopher's leadership in the Engineered Products Division, those folks have turned market and customer analysis into a science, literally to the point of taking airframes, decomposing them, understanding by part number whether they or the competitor is the leader, and building strategies around how we're going to increase share of wallet based on very detailed analysis of what the market opportunities are.
You highlighted the importance of piloting, iteration, testing of growth concepts at the smallest replicable unit. Can you please explain this in more detail and contrast it with the prevailing practices in most firms around growth?
The idea of the smallest replicable unit is to not confuse the issue of testing and developing an idea so that it works with the idea of scaling and deploying the idea. And too often in traditional plans, those ideas get muddled up. The plan contains an idea that's a very good idea for growth, but it has not been developed and tested to the point where we know it really works. People then start to execute on that idea, discover what the challenges are, and in fact are held back. Better than that approach is one that says, let's take the idea, let's take the smallest instantiation of that idea we can come up with, the smallest replicable unit that has all the critical features of that idea built within it. Let's simplify our life by not making it too big, and let's really test and iterate and get it to work. Then we can worry about how we deploy and scale the idea. So when we're still in the lab trying to pressure test a growth concept to turn it into an investable proposition, less is more.
Talent is often a gating factor, a rate limiter on a company's ability to seize growth opportunities. What advice do you have for senior executives on cracking the talent issue around growth?
There are three things that senior leaders need to think about when it comes to the talent necessary for growth. Interestingly, the instinct of many senior leaders I talk to is to immediately reach outside the organization and say, oh, I've got to go get people that know how to grow. I'm not sure that that's always the first step I take. There's plenty of other things we can do. First thing is, get your HR professionals to really define the different roles that people need to play within a growth context. There's one role, which is really a creativity role around generating a lot of growth concepts. We're not asking people to fill this role full time, so we're looking for how we can engage the organization and get lots of people and their very creative ideas into one place where we can evaluate them. That really is a cultural issue. That's a leadership issue of how do we really encourage the organization and get them to understand that we really recognize and see in value in their help in developing growth concepts. There's a second role, very specialized role, around how you develop a concept into something that's really investable. It's not unlike the skill set of an entrepreneur who's able to take a concept and really develop it into a fully functioning business. That's a very specialized role. Oftentimes you're going to find the people that have that skill may have had some entrepreneurial experience before they came to your firm, or they may be coming from different parts of the firm and it's just an innate skill that they've got. They're the hardest group of people to find. The third kind of role is a role around execution and deployment, and that's a very different set of skills. Here we're giving people something we know works. We're asking them to deploy and scale it with real speed. And clearly, they're going to have to keep adjusting it to make it work perfectly within the marketplace, but it's a very different kind of execution skill. Most firms have a lot of those people in place. If you look at those 3 roles, then what you next got to do is ask your talent management people to think about talent as a supply chain. You know, how do we identify how much of that talent we need? How do we source it from inside the organization, or if necessary from outside? How do we deploy people? How do we develop them in place? How do we do triage between the high performers and the low performers, make sure we retain the high performers? So there really is a way, both by defining the roles, by thinking about talent as a supply chain, and then lastly, how do we make sure we have recognition systems so that we're really communicating to the organization that these kinds of skills we really value.
What are the essential roles and responsibilities that you see senior executives playing in instilling a growth discipline in their organizations?
Well, a growth discipline can never take root without the senior executives passionately believing in it and driving their organization in that direction. Senior executives are watched very carefully by their organization. People listen less to what they say and are much more affected by what those senior executives do. Every day, senior executives make trade-offs between profits and growth and other kinds of things, and the actions they take speak very loudly to the organization about where growth sits within their priorities. So first and foremost, I would say that this isn't something you can fake. If you're going to lead your organization toward a growth discipline, you need to be deeply, emotionally, and rationally committed to the process. The next thing is that as senior executives, because you control the resources and because you control the focus that the organization is to have, you have enormous impact over building that growth discipline, both in terms of how you can guide strategy deployment and in terms of how you can bring talented people and other resources to bear on those problems. Here's the really strange thing about it, though. The uncomfortable piece for senior executives is this approach to growth, innovation, and growth discipline really means you play less of a role in strategy development. Typically, senior executives are deeply involved in all aspects of strategy, but here we're asking executives to take it not too much past the level of vision and strategy priorities. The actual strategy of what we actually do in the marketplace, that will emerge from all of the innovative activities taking place among a wide group of people. So in an odd way, what senior people do is they start regulating a market of ideas and choosing which ones to resource and which ones to promote, but they're less the authors of those ideas than in the traditional way of doing growth planning.
How can a company get started in building a growth discipline? Is there a way to prioritize the first few steps they should take from among all the essential components that you discussed in your presentation?
We strongly believe that when you start down this path of building a growth discipline, that focus is essential. Don't start broad, start narrow. Start in a defined area where I can assemble enough talent, bring enough focus, have enough clarity of strategic priorities, get enough engagement that we can achieve some level of success that becomes a demonstration vehicle to the rest of the organization. So we're very strong believers in start small. That's not surprising, because if you think about implementing a growth discipline within your organization as itself an innovation process, what do we really say? Start with the smallest replicable unit. You know, we're trying to pressure test that this really will work in our organization. So let's not make it so large that we doom it to failure initially. Let's make it small. Let's iterate. Let's improve upon, let's get this process of innovation to drive growth initiatives, let's get that to work. Once we do that, then we can think about how we broaden out engagement, how we scale it, in essence, to have a broader impact in the organization, before then thinking about how do you actually institutionalize it. So very, very important is you start narrowly. You may have a broad base of communications and education, but more narrowly focus the resources to really have some impact on growth that becomes the validation for the rest of the organization that this is a very powerful way for us to operate.
Thank you, Dr. Treacy.
Thank you.